BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hello and welcome to the Farming Today podcast with me, Charlotte Smith. In this episode, a heightened risk of bird flu brings new rules for English shoots. But first, a tribute to David Richardson, who died earlier this week at the age of 87. David was a bit of a legend, a Norfolk farmer, a journalist and a broadcaster. He was a leading voice in British agriculture for 60 years. Alongside running his own farm, he wrote for newspapers, the farming press, presented on TV and presented and contributed to this programme. He also became the first presenter of our long-running sister programme On Your Farm. Last year he spoke to Vernon Harwood to mark the programme's 60th anniversary.
On Your Farm, a weekly review of the agricultural scene, introduced this week by David Richardson.
Good morning, and what a wonderful growing week it's been. Those warm, light rains were just what we needed. You'll excuse me being...
Well, I happened to be in the right place at the right time, I suppose, and Tony Parkin came over to Norfolk to supervise me one day when I was reporting on the Norfolk show. And he said, would you like to come and do stuff on this programme, which was then going national. It had been a regional programme.
You went from farming pigs and there you were in the world of radio journalism. Did you find it an easy transition?
I learned on the job, I suppose. I've always been an inquisitive person and I liked asking questions. And that's what interviewing is all about. And if you get interesting answers, you hope that those answers might also be interesting to other people, and that's really what broadcasting is all about.
I don't know if you've got a proudest moment on the programme?
I do remember when we went to have breakfast with Joe Godber, who was Minister of Agriculture at the time.
Mr. Godber's now doing his second stint in Whitehall Place, and he lives here at Willington in Bedfordshire, where we're just finishing a wonderful breakfast provided by Mrs. Godber.
Tony Parkin said, could we take the phone off the hook? We don't want it ringing in the middle of the programme. And Joe Godber said, no. He said, we can't do that. He said, might be number 10. But 2 minutes after we'd finished recording, the phone did ring. And Mrs. Godber went to answer the phone and Tony said, number 10? And Mrs. Godber said, no, it's Mrs. Maggs from next door. Her cat's back.
The late David Richardson. Now, all this week we're talking salad, and today it's the vexed question of peat. With increased understanding of peat extraction's climate and environmental costs, many domestic gardeners now avoid it. But removing peat from commercial veg plant production is proving problematic. Despite successive governments intending to ban peat from horticulture, there's currently no date set. Growers are battling to overcome practical issues with peat-free compost, particularly where salad crops are concerned. In Devon, the organic farmers Riverford are carrying out trials in pursuit of a peat-free future. Our reporter Sarah Swadling met Riverford's sustainability researcher, Dr. Rebecca Bragg.
We're not that proud about using the amount of peat that we use. Lettuce that we use is grown in 80% peat at the moment. We've done this one project that's looking at completely getting rid of peat from the blocks that we grow our lettuce in, but we don't have that commercially available yet. So we are trialling growing some lettuce in reduced peat. So these lettuce have 70% peat in the blocks that they're grown in. We're comparing the weights of these lettuce heads to the lettuce heads that are grown in our usual blocks that contain 80% peat.
These lettuces, there are all different textures, all different colours, greens and reds, stretching away across the field. These will have started life initially at a nursery.
So these lettuce here that we've got growing in this field come from a nursery. They will have been sown into peat blocks until they're sort of ready to be planted out.
Why is it proving so difficult for commercial veg growers, whether conventional or organic, to remove peat from their systems?
We grow lettuce in blocks. Peat is really good for this because it goes through a machine. They push it through at a high force and it creates a structure that holds together really well. And you can pull the peat block out with the one seedling in very easily and then put it into the machine that we use. We need something that isn't using peat, that can hold this structure but also have a good level of nutrients in there.
If we pull back some of this plastic and have a scratch underneath, if I dig away at the base of this plant,
This is our peat-free growing medium, and as you can see, it is really loose. It's very dusty.
And what sort of things would it be containing instead of peat?
It's like council waste, it's green waste. There'll be a bit of wood chip in there as well.
I'm with Ed Scott now, who's Polytunnel Operations Manager at Riverford.
So in front of us here, we've got a bay of tomatoes which are grown in a peat-free medium. We've been running this experiment for a couple of years now and getting slightly disappointing yields. We want to reduce and get rid of peat, so we're persevering with it. This year it's looking quite good actually, because as you can see here, we've got 2 bays right beside each other, planted a day apart. And when they came in, they were pretty much the same size. And you can see our peat-free ones are looking slightly bigger than the control, which have their peat blocks. The ones grown in peat-free do tend to be a bit slower to take off, and I think it's just down to, lower nutrient content in the peat-free medium. The plant nursery who raises these tomatoes from seed for us sowed the peat-free ones a little bit earlier. The idea being when they arrive with us, they'll be the same height. And naturally, that seems to have worked really well.
Do you think it's imminent that a business like Riverford would be able to successfully move away from using peat?
I'd say within 5 years, we should be able to be 100% peat-free. And if not, it would be disappointing.
Riverford's Polytunnel Operations Manager Ed Scott there. Now, 2 rule changes on 2 diseases in 2 countries. Let's start with the easing of Bluetongue rules on animals moving from England to Scotland. Bluetongue is a virus spread by biting midges. It affects sheep, cattle and goats, but not humans. Following a number of cases in England, the whole country became a restricted area earlier this year, which meant that animals moving into Wales and Scotland faced costly pre-movement testing. As we reported earlier this week, the Welsh rules have been relaxed, and from the 21st of next month, the rules on animals going into Scotland will also change. The Scottish Government says as the weather cools, there will be fewer midges, and testing will not be required except for breeding animals. Vaccination remains recommended. Neil Wilson from the Institute of Auctioneers and Appraisers in Scotland says the current restrictions have had an impact.
I've actually had a couple of Scottish store cattle buyers on the phone over the last few days just asking where we were with regulations, because they would normally go into north of England and buy and obviously had been relatively unable to, albeit they could have brought some vaccinated cattle over the border if they were available. So they were sort of running short of cattle. So yes, impactful, but from now on, with these restrictions still been in place for another month, we will see broader impact. Much more breeding sales coming along, store sales getting busier.
Practically then, what difference will it make come September?
It's really going to open up the market at a very, very important time of year cross-border. So in southern Scotland and the north of England, it's going to make things easier.
The Scottish Government say vaccination remains recommended. Are farmers vaccinating? Because there is a cost to that.
There is a cost to that, and look, from our perspective at the Institute of Auctioneers, we would be strongly encouraging vaccination as well. I've vaccinated my cows, and it came in about a £5 a head. It didn't feel significant or burdensome.
Why has the need for a pre-movement test had such an impact?
Certainly in sheep, I think the cost, economically unviable. I've had various numbers, but it's sort of floated between £50 and £70 for a test. And unless you're dealing with high-value pedigree sheep, it's uneconomic. And it's certainly uneconomic when you compare it to a vaccination of possibly £2.50 in a sheep. It's more economic for cattle because of the difference in value, but I think even then there are challenges in capacity. It's been fine, I think, for officials to say, yeah, OK, we want some pre-movement or post-movement testing done, but I don't think there's been enough work done in the background to make sure there has been capacity to deal with that, and that I think has put people off even just pursuing it.
Neil Wilson from the Institute of Auctioneers in Scotland. Well, in England, new rules on game birds are being introduced after warnings of a heightened risk of avian flu. The government says there have been more new cases, particularly in coastal areas and places with a significant number of shoots. The whole of Great Britain is an avian flu prevention zone, meaning that all bird keepers have to enforce strict hygiene standards and gatherings of birds remain banned. Game birds, like pheasants, can be released except in control zones around an outbreak and in protected areas of England, where a shoot needs a licence. English shoots will now have to introduce stricter biosecurity, for instance, cleaning and covering feed and water to protect them from wild bird droppings, which can spread the infection, disinfecting vehicles and keeping records of any visits. As we discussed here on Farming Today last week, the RSPB says no game birds should be released this year because of the risks of them spreading the disease, while BASC, the British Association for Shooting and Conservation, says the licensing system isn't working and that shoots already take biosecurity very seriously. The UK's chief vet, Christine Middlemiss.
We've seen an uptick in avian flu cases in the last few weeks, and the risk level where biosecurity is poor has increased back to medium. A number of the new outbreaks we've seen, quite a number have been in game birds, and following that we've decided that we need to put in some additional measures specifically around game bird requirements and biosecurity.
Are you concerned that we are now having a summer issue with bird flu? Because it has been seen as something linked to migratory birds and winter.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Traditionally, we didn't have infection over the summer. It came with migratory birds. This is the second summer where we've seen it over summer, if you like. It gets into seabird species, gull species. This summer it's been mostly more herring gulls. Gulls start moving around again at this time of year, away from their nesting sites. They link up with spreads infection to water birds, and that can bring it back into our kept birds. This particular strain of bird flu is very resilient, takes very little virus to create infection.
Given that, was it a mistake to allow the release of game birds this year?
Well, we allow activities based on the risk we're facing at the time, and when most of them were being released, we were down at low risk for both high and low biosecurity levels. We put in measures as the risk levels escalate, and we take them out as the risk levels reduce again, and these are assessed by our experts.
We heard from the RSPB here on Farming Today last week, saying that they thought that the release of game birds should be halted given the risks. Could they be saying, "We told you so"?
We use our experts assess the risk and we take our actions based on that. So I'm confident that when the risk was low, that's what it was assessed as. But movement of seabirds starting to happen as they leave their nesting sites. Bridging species start being infected, and that's what's driven the risk back up again.
You're introducing these stricter biosecurity rules for shoots, although many of them will say they're doing much of it already.
Yes, that's true, and that's great, but we have found that not everybody is doing it, and so that's why we're bringing it into the avian influenza prevention zone to ensure that absolutely everybody is doing it.
You mentioned housing. At what point do you think you might have to bring free-range hens and so on back inside?
So we're looking at the localised risk for that. I don't think we're at the stage of considering it for England or across GB, but certainly we're keeping a close eye on East Anglia and the southwest. We look every week, our experts assess clusters of outbreaks and what might be linking them. We know that water courses are critical in terms of the risk. So where we get a lot of kept birds around water courses and we're seeing a cluster of infection, then absolutely that's often a trigger for a regionalised housing measure. We haven't got clear clusters indicating that yet, but it certainly is a measure that's at the forefront of our minds, and we may well step up to that.
Chief Vet Christine Middlemiss. That's it from us. I'm Charlotte Smith. The producer is Rebecca Rooney, and Farming Today is a BBC Audio Bristol production.